Chapter 24. Alexis picked me up early Saturday morning for a trip to a ranch on the west side of Mount Graham. At first the drive was quiet, and I had plenty of time to think. I hadn't heard from Brandon since the call on Tuesday. Part of me was relieved, but another part was worried. We'd been friends too long not to be worried, no matter how mad I was. Pushing him out of my mind, I focused on today's trip. The ranch was owned by a pack member, and we were supposed to be safe shifting there without worrying about being seen. Alexis had asked several people to volunteer to let me practice calling their wolves. The ones who had agreed were going to meet us there. She had enough volunteers that I wasn't sure if I could shift them all. The trip took more than an hour, mostly over rough dirt roads. When we arrived, I was thankful to get out of the car and stretch my legs. I felt like I'd rattled halfway across the country. The dust was still settling as I opened the door and slid out. I did a few squats before walking in small circles. I moved with exaggerated motions, bending this way and that as I worked out some of the kinks. I heard Alexis and Caden get out and looked over to see Alexis doing the same. Her footsteps made a light crunch in the gravel. Caden's much heavier step was still. Either he wasn't suffering or he wasn't willing to show it. He stood next to his closed door, watching us. His reaction was my first clue we weren't alone. He lost his relaxed pose and he stood upright away from the car, suddenly alert. I turned, looking toward the house, but saw nothing. I turned a slow circle, trying to spot what had alerted Caden. At roughly 180 degrees, I spotted him. An older man, probably in his 60s, maybe a very weathered 50s. Alexis smiled and went to him. "Joe. Thanks again for letting us do this. It's a big help." She turned to me. "This is Nickie Daniels. She's the one who'll be calling your wolf today. Nickie, this is Joe Adams. He's our host this morning." I smiled as I shook his hand. He was several inches taller than me, probably just shy of 6 feet, and had captivating gold eyes. When I touched his hand, I felt a low-level buzz that told me he was powerful. I struggled not to react. "You're pretty old to be just discovering talents," Joe said. "I am," I said. "I've only recently discovered I'm kindred. I was adopted and never knew about any of this until I shifted." "I bet that was a surprise," he said. I nodded. "Wait a minute. You said Daniels, right?" he asked, turning back to Alexis. "Sure did. You from around here?" Joe asked me. "Grew up in the valley," I said. "Adopted, Daniels, and from the valley," he ticked off the details on one hand. "You're one of James and Brenda's tribe, aren't you?" He sounded pleased. "And proud of it." "You should be, they're good people. Done a good job raising you kids too." "I think so," I wasn't sure what to say. We stood and visited for a little bit while we waited for everyone to arrive. 30 minutes later, several trucks and a few cars had pulled into the large driveway and we had a small crowd. Alexis easily took charge. "Attention please," she yelled. The noise of many conversations quieted so they could hear her. I wasn't sure if it was her position that demanded obedience, or Caden's large form standing behind her looking menacing. "Thank you all for agreeing to let Nickie call your wolf today. She needs the practice. She'd like to be able to use her abilities to be an asset to the pack. By agreeing today, you're not only doing me a favor, but you're helping us all. Here's how things are going to go. Nickie hasn't been among us for long, and she isn't entirely comfortable with casual nudity yet. She can handle 1 or 2 at a time, but I think all of us would overwhelm her. That won't serve our purpose. So Nickie will stand on one side of the parking area, and we'll take turns. You can approach her 1 at a time and let her shift you. Please keep in mind she's new, not only at calling animal forms, but as one of us. She's still learning our ways." A soft murmur spread through the crowd, but it soon quieted. "Who wants to go first?" Several hands shot into the air. Joe stepped forward. It's my place, I'll go last and be a good host. Thanks, Joe, Alexis said before turning back to the group. How many of us are there? There was an even dozen. I thought it should be plenty if I could shift them all. The one time I'd done it, I'd been exhausted. I had some shakes handy just in case, but we'd see how things went. To avoid dominance problems, Alexis decided to draw numbers. After the details were worked out, she pulled me to the far side of the parked vehicles while the first couple of people undressed. Take this one at a time, she instructed. After each shift, we'll pause and see how you feel. Shifting others can be as draining as shifting yourself. All right, you're the teacher. If you don't decide to have me do something I'm against, I won't argue. Alexis nodded and called the first person. I carefully kept my eyes on the man's face. He was about my age and only a few inches taller than me. His long dark hair was pulled back into a short ponytail. He wore small gold hoops in both ears, and I could see the edges of a tattoo reaching up his neck, but I refused to lower my eyes to see what it was. His name was Rick. I had been introduced to him earlier. I shook his hand again as Alexis spoke. Are you ready? I asked. Sure, no reason to wait, he said with a smile. Why don't you get into whatever position you prefer to shift in? I suggested, thinking it would be easier for us both that way. Rick bent down in front of me until he was down on one knee with his back curled so his hands could rest on the ground. I reached out but didn't touch him. Instead, I held my hand barely over his skin. I closed my eyes and sent my senses out, pushing them into him, using the part that senses power to look for his wolf. I found the wolf in the small space where they seemed to live. I sent the undefinable power to soothe him for a moment before trying to coax it out, to encourage the wolf to the surface. The wolf moved to the surface and I opened my eyes. I was looking sightlessly, not focusing on my hand or at Rick beyond it, when his body started to change. I tried to look more closely, but his body seemed to blur before my eyes. When the blur cleared, there was a large black wolf standing in front of me, and he looked up at me with clear amber eyes. I sent a thought to him, "Are you okay?" He looked up, intelligence shining in his eyes as he nodded once before turning and walking away. "How are you?" Alexis asked. "Good, I was nervous, but now that I've done one, I'm better." "Not tired? You feel like you can do another one?" "Nope, not tired, at least not yet. I'm ready for another." "All right." She turned and motioned for the next person. This time a young blonde girl rounded the corner. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, but she seemed very sure. "Hello," I extended my hand. "Can I ask your name?" "Becky." She shook it firmly. "You know what happens, right?" "Yep, I've had it done before." "Okay, what position do you prefer?" She bent down in what I soon realized was a common position for shifting. It was the position I used too. It had seemed natural the first time I shifted on purpose. Once she was on one knee with back bowed and her hands on the ground beside her, I again reached out and sent my power into her. I felt her wolf sitting inside. It seemed anxious, and when I beckoned, it refused my call. I sent my power further, trying to be gentle first. Her wolf still balked. I had to grab it with my power and pull it forward. It resisted more, not wanting to surface, but suddenly Becky's form blurred before my eyes, and then her slender gray wolf form became clear. "You feeling all right?" I asked. "Great," she replied. I motioned for her to go, and she trotted off in the direction she had come. "How are you feeling now?" Alexis asked me. "Tired." Her wolf fought it. She didn't want to surface. Forcing it to the surface took a lot more energy than calling one that wanted to come. "I agree," Alexis said, going to the rear of her SUV. She lifted the hatch. "Come over here." She handed me a canned shake from an ice chest in the cargo area. "Drink that." I shook the small can briskly before popping the top and draining it in one long drink. "Want another?" Probably should just to be safe. She handed me a can, and I drank this a little slower, the aching hunger eating its way through my middle had eased. Ready to start again? Might as well. I dropped the empty cans into the bag next to the ice chest. I'll get the next one. She went to the other end of the car while I sat on the bumper, letting my body absorb the shakes for a minute. As the next volunteer rounded the front of the vehicle, I stood and prepared to continue. I shifted 4 more, with a break after 2 for more shakes, before I called a halt. I needed to walk around and I needed more food, but too many shakes were making me nauseous. I mingled with the remaining volunteers, getting to know some of the pack a little better. When my stomach had settled a little, I looked for Alexis to ask if she had thought to bring anything else I could eat, because I hadn't. I was almost to her when Joe stopped me. I thought you could use something real to eat, so I've started the grill, and I've got a stack of burgers ready to go on. Thank you, I said gratefully. I was just headed to ask Alexis if she had anything but those shakes. They work great, but I can only stomach so many at a time. I haven't picked up any yet, though word's gone out they're good, quick energy. I can imagine they'd get old if you were drinking one after another. They can, I confirmed. Give me about half an hour. I'll have some meat ready for you to sink your teeth into. That sounds like heaven, thank you. He turned away and I continued to Alexis. I told her what Joe had said and continued with, I think some real food will help. Good. I think a break will do us all good. She finished her conversation with another woman and turned back to me. Are you more comfortable calling animal forms yet? I am. Some people seem to be more difficult than others. I can't figure out why it sometimes feels like they don't want to shift. I can do it, it's just harder. It feels like they're fighting you because they are. I asked several people to resist shifting, so you could practice calling reluctant animals. Sometimes medications or injury will make it harder to call an animal form. This is a good way to practice. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see if you could tell the difference, as well as get an idea how strong you are. Some resisting are pretty strong, but you're doing great. Thanks. I'd like to eat, finish shifting the last few, then head home. Do you think that would be possible, or will it be an insult not to join their run? Nah, Joe's understanding. I warned him that you might be too tired to want to join in. Good. I don't want anyone upset, but the more I shift, the more exhausted I am. Real food will go a long way, but I'm going to be tired again and want to get back before I'm totally drained. Not a problem. I'll let Caden know the plan, then we'll see if Joe's got those burgers ready. Caden won't stay and run? No, he'll go with us. I thought he was going to run. If we were running, he would. Since he's security, he stays with us, whatever we do. We ate and I shifted the remaining volunteers, including Joe, before Alexis, Caden and I climbed into the SUV and went back to town. I was quiet most of the trip, enjoying the view I'd been too nervous to notice on the way out. I listened to the music Alexis and Caden chose while I drank another of the shakes from the ice chest as they quietly chatted in the front seat. Once we hit the paved road and the ride was smoother, I dozed off. By the time Alexis pulled into my parking lot, I was feeling better. I thanked them both, gathered my things, and headed for my apartment,